Good morning and happy Monday. I'm SunAh, and it is so good to be here with you this beautiful morning here in the Mid-South. You're listening to Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. Every Monday morning, I'm joined by experts from across the country who are investigating our most pressing social issues and common curiosities. Over the next hour, you'll learn about their inspirations, motivations, and of course, what they know about the world around us. So grab that cup of coffee and get ready for a fun and insightful conversation. September 30th is International Podcast Day, a day to celebrate the power of podcasting. Currently, there are over 2 million podcasts, and approximately 55% of all U.S. households have listened to a podcast. You probably have some favorites, and I hope Let's Grab Coffee is one of them. But what does it take to create a podcast that reaches a national or even international audience? And what does it take to become a full-time podcaster? Joining me this morning is someone who can answer some of these questions, Dominic Lawson. In 2016, Dominic began the Startup Life podcast, giving his audience the edge it needs in building their businesses and climbing the corporate ladder. His guests are seasoned entrepreneurs who created many of the businesses that are part of your life. Hello, Netflix, for example. Dominic has hosted over 300 episodes of the Startup Life podcast. It's currently in syndication, but he has moved on to host, produce, and edit podcasts for Meadows Behavioral Healthcare. And in early 2022, he'll be launching Black is America podcast, which will highlight little-known African-American figures and stories. Good morning, Dominic, and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I was almost trying to figure out who you was talking about, all those superlatives.
You know, I am talking about you, Podfather. Let's go ahead and throw that name out there. The Podfather, and y'all can see why. I mean, creating a podcast over 300 episodes when we know that most podcasts don't even make it to 100 or don't even make it to 50. So over 300 is quite a feat, not to mention syndication. And I'm super excited about your next podcast venture, Black is America. I'm really excited about that. So yes, it's you. And I had to have you on in honor of International Podcast Day, because you are someone who has really, led the way for a lot of podcasters here in Memphis. So it's great to have you with us.
Memphis has a ton of talent, and so podcasting is really just another medium to kind of share that talent with the world. So, people throw around that title Podfather and stuff like that. And I get that, I appreciate that, but I see it more as a responsibility than an accolade. You know what I mean? I feel like it's a responsibility to find other people who have a voice, who have a unique voice, especially here in the city of Memphis, the beautiful land in the world. I had to get that in there. The beautiful land in the world, to kind of really put them on the podcasting platform and share their voice, a unique voice and their unique insight. Because, if you grow up in Memphis, we have a lot of unique insights. And so podcasting, like I said, is just a great medium to kind of share that with the world.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I love how accessible podcasting is. And we'll kind of get into some of that as well, but super accessible, easy to kind of start a podcast. And, now podcasting is so familiar to folks. So it's really easy to share a podcast, or people have a language around podcasting now that maybe they didn't have even just a few years ago.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're starting to see everybody, every walk of life, seems like they have a podcast now. You mentioned that figure, over 2 million people. There's over 2 million podcasts out there, which just seems crazy right now, because I think when I started, 5 years ago, I think there was only about maybe 250,000, maybe 500,000 podcasts. Now you're talking about over 2 million. And so, and the crazy thing is, I know a lot of people have during the pandemic and the start of the pandemic, people were just kind of in the homes and stuff like that. That's where a lot of those new podcasters have come from, come about or whatever. But I say welcome. The medium is for everybody, and that's the beauty of podcasting. There's nobody to come in and say, hey, you're canceled or you're shut down. It's all up to you. So I just really love that part.
I love that as well, that it is for everyone. And so just to make that clear, because for some folks, they may not understand, like, oh, we're saying it's for everyone, but what does that really mean? Could you give our listeners kind of just a breakdown of what it takes to just start a podcast?
I think, and that's an excellent question. And it's a question I get all the time. I think the first thing you need to start with is an idea. What do you want to talk about? How do you want to relay that message? Before you get the microphones, before you rent the studio space, before you get all the doodads and bells and whistles, what do you want to talk about? And on top of that, if you're talking about some of the same things that everybody else is talking about, how can you make that deliverable different than everybody else? I tell people all the time, it's great to talk about, sports or pop culture and stuff like that. But why would I want to listen to you as opposed to Joe Rogan or The Breakfast Club or something like that? You know what I mean? Which is, and I mentioned those people because they are at the top of our industry when it comes to podcasting. So that, I think that's the first thing, you want to kind of think about, sketch it out, write it out, whatever the case may be, kind of build the format, things of that nature. Then we start, with the equipment, microphones and stuff like that. And the thing is, you're probably listening to this, maybe you're listening to this in the car, on the radio, or you're listening to this on the replay on a podcast as well, which means that, like, if you have a smartphone, you can start a podcast. You don't need the studio. You don't need, all this other stuff. I was telling somebody the other day, I started with a $50 microphone that was sitting on top of some books, you know what I mean? And a laptop. You know what I mean? And so you don't need a whole lot, which is part of the beauty of podcasting. I think we fall into the trap often of, like, that comparison, thing, right? Like, oh, I see Joe Rogan, he got the table and I got to get the Shure microphone and it costs like $400 a piece, or you can just take that smartphone, you're listening to us right now, and just record some stuff. And some apps have it to where as soon as you record it, you can, upload it directly to SoundCloud or Libsyn or whatever server or that you want to put up on. And speaking of servers, there's plenty of them. Like I said, I mentioned SoundCloud and Libsyn, but there's some free ones out there like Blueberry and Podbean. And so all that to say, in a long-winded, because I'm a podcaster, I like to talk. All that to say that if you want to start a podcast, start with an idea, and also you don't need a ton of equipment. You don't need all the new bells and whistles to get started. Start with that idea, sketch out that idea, kind of focus group that idea, talk to friends and family to see, hey, would you listen to this podcast? Would you, does this sound like this is cool and stuff like that? But also talk to people who are not related to you, right? Just kind of throw it out there, because a lot of times friends and family, and they mean no harm. They mean the best, right? And they're going to tell you, oh, this is dope. This is, this podcast is hot fire. And then you find out, like, no, that podcast is hot trash. So, so my point is that, like, get different types of feedback from a diverse number of people. So when you talk about podcasting,
I love that it's as simple as having a good idea, an idea that you fleshed out, an idea that you've thought about. Okay, what is it that will be unique about the way I'm presenting information that surely there are probably dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of podcasts that are similar in, the topic or, the content or even the format, because that's the reality.
Yeah, and you're only limited by that imagination as well, which I think is awesome. Is cool.
Yeah, I love that. Just having that good idea, making it yours, not trying to be the next Breakfast Club, or not trying to imitate, but bringing your own flavor. And as you mentioned in the beginning, Memphis has a lot of flavor, so we don't have to try to replicate. We bring our own.
We do not lack for seasoning in Memphis at all.
Absolutely. And that second point of just keep it simple. Yes, of course, for these kind of major podcasts like yours, we might see all the equipment, we might see the video looking in the studio, all of that, but you can start a podcast with just your phone.
Okay. So I'm glad you said that, because I need to highlight this, right? True enough, I started in the closet. Well, right now, with the new role and stuff like that, with the Meadows and stuff like that. Yes, I got the equipment and the high priced equipment, but it didn't start there. Right. I built up to that. Right. 5 years ago, when podcasting, which was still kind of his infancy now, but it definitely was then, I did what I had to do. It was me, my laptop, the closet, and some books to have the microphone up, and there you go. But I guess I just wanted to point that out, that look, where you start is not necessarily where you end, right? And if you put in the time, put in the effort, do a little bit of networking and schmoozing along the way, and take a few risks, you can be bigger than me. You can be bigger than Joe Rogan. Again, it's just a matter of being limited by your imagination, your creativity, and your grind, as we like to say it.
Yes, absolutely. That is so important. Folks often focus on the equipment, or like you said, all the bells and whistles, and they forget the most important part, which is creating the content and making it yours. And that's something that you've really mastered.
I appreciate that. But, and the thing is, I'm glad you brought that up. I think even if you know a topic, like the back of your hand, you should still do research on that topic, because just because you are the expert, there's also other experts that have different commentaries, different, ways of thinking of it. If you're a microbiologist, yeah, maybe you have a way of looking at microbiology, but there's so many other microbiologists that have a different doctrine, a different set of eyes, different experiences, different parts of the world, right? So they can bring some new and added, content and added value to what you're already doing. And honestly, if I'm being honest, sometimes you don't even have to be the expert. As if you're bringing on the expert, you're going to seem as smart to the audience as if you are with them, even though we all know that's not true. But the thing is that it's that transference, if you will, right? So, even if you're not the expert, you bring on the experts, depending on what type of show you have, and you can see just as credible as the person that you're bringing on your show.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, especially in an interview style podcast,
right,
that is the benefit. You can have on guests who are definitely way smarter than you or more knowledgeable.
Everybody who comes on my show is smarter than me. So,
but it's all about asking the right question.
Absolutely.
And so that brings me to a question, because you mentioned research. About how much prep time do you take for an episode?
That is an amazing question. It's an excellent question. And it's a question that needs to be, asked all the time. So for every 30 minutes of content that you probably hear, there's probably 4 hours of content for every 30 minutes that you hear, right? And we're talking about well thought out, good, podcasts like NPR does, right? Now granted, they have 15, 30 researchers at their disposal, and it's just little old me in Memphis, Tennessee. You know what I mean? But no, the thing is that, again, you want to put in that time, that research, because it's not even just the research, it's the editing. It's the editing, it's the securing of guests, all of the above, right? But just the research alone takes a lot. You got to read, peer review stuff, depending on what you're talking about, right? Or even if it's just pop culture or something like that, because I know that's kind of a popular genre when it comes to podcasting. Even if you're listening to the Breakfast Club or Wendy Williams or something like that, they have different, whatever, seeing something. So that research is just super important. But to answer your question, about 3 to 4 hours of actual research for every 30 minutes of content you hear. So if you have an hour long show, then, that's 8 hours per show, right? Or 30 minutes, you can do the math, right? But you know, that's kind of where that comes from and how much it probably takes if you're going to be good at it. Now, look, if you want to just do an hour of research, that's fine. You know, that's fine too. But just know, and this is the thing about podcast audiences, you know, they know what's authentic and what's not. Don't you can't feed them just a whole bunch of junk and just expect them like to just eat it. They're not. They're gonna call you on it. Go look at them review sections in the Apple Podcast. They'll let you know for sure. They'll hold you accountable. But that accountability is a good thing, because I always tell people, you know what outranks a podcast expert is a podcast listener. Because at the end of the day, you know, no matter what you say, it's all about what the listener wants to hear. And if you're not providing that, then you know, you're going to hear about it in those review sections of Apple Podcasts or wherever you have podcasts at.
Absolutely. They will not hold back on the review.
No, they will not. You know, they will not. You know, there's been plenty I've seen. You know, unfortunately, I haven't had any bad ones like that. You know, I've had a few on YouTubers like, okay, you know, but I've seen some where it's like, you know, since we're on the radio, I can't repeat, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about. They do not hold back. So yeah, you definitely, that brings me to another, you definitely got to have a little bit of thick skin when it comes to podcasting, because you're putting your creativity out there. You're putting yourself, you're being vulnerable out there. So you do kind of have to build that thick skin when you're going this journey.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because everything that's in the public domain is open to all sorts of critique, and definitely, especially depending upon what type of podcast you might be creating, might have very personal information, right? And that can be you can start to feel very sensitive, around that when you get some of those negative reviews or negative feedback. I think it was so important what you said about the amount of prep, because you listen to a good podcast episode, it sounds so seamless. It's hitting all the key points. There might be, different types of entertainment within it, whether it's the intro music, outro music, you're on a journey of, laughter, maybe even surprise or excitement or shock. And it takes a lot to create all those feelings and that kind of journey. And I think the more seamless it seems, that indicates even more work has happened behind the scenes.
Absolutely. As when it comes to, and I know we'll talk about this later, the Black is America podcast. So this will be the first podcast where it's not that interview style back and forth. It's more of that NPR narrative storytelling. And so when you listen to a podcast like that, like, man, this is awesome. The music hit different. They got the interwoven interviews. And then you go behind the scenes and he was like, if you're watching on YouTube right now, you can see my face. He was like, oh man, like it's an undertaking. It really is an undertaking, right? And you can see why those episodes are only between 25 and 35 minutes. Like there's 25 to 35 minutes to get it to sound like that is a lot of work. You got to get the interviews, then you got to transcribe the interviews, then you have to put then you have to write the script, then you have to put the transcribed parts that you want in the episode within the script that you write, and then you got to record it all, right? And then you got to sound design it, right? So it's an undertaking. But the thing is, those are the podcasts, however, that keep people coming back, that keep people wanting more, to get you those 5-star reviews. And because the thing is, when it comes to a podcast like that, stories stick. They really do. People love stories. No matter from now to the end of time, stories matter. And so people love those stories. But that prep time, it's something. It is definitely something. And honestly, that's what shy a lot of people away from the industry. Unfortunately, unfortunately, we have a lot of people who have amazing podcast ideas, but when it gets to that editing, it's like,
Oh yeah. That prep time on the front end, that editing on the back end.
Yeah.
It is a lot. And that can, there's one thing about enthusiasm, right? That can kind of carry you for a few episodes, but then you quickly learn, okay, I need more than just enthusiasm. I do have to plan out the episodes, even if it's a loose outline. I can't just hit record and expect magic to happen.
I look, one of the best to ever do, what we do, like interview style and stuff like that is Larry King, and even though he didn't prep with like questions and stuff ahead of time, he always knew in his head what direction he was going to go. Now, but that comes with years and years beyond the 10,000 hours, as Malcolm Gladwell would say, of just experience in that time. But, and eventually you can get there, but that prep time, it's key. It's key. Like you said, SunAh, even if it's just a brief outline, that part is important. And honestly, even if you just had like a really short outline, that puts you ahead of the game of about 50 to 75% of the podcasters right there. It really does.
All right, y'all. That's a gem. Make sure you have your outline, at the very least, an outline of where the episode is headed, where the podcast as a whole is headed, and that will put you ahead of the game. Well, let's take a quick break. You're listening to Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. You're listening to Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. I'm SunAh, and I'm here with Dominic Lawson, and we are talking about podcasting in honor of International Podcast Day, which is September 30th. Now, you have a couple of successful podcasts, but I want to start with the Startup Life, over 300 episodes, syndicated. Come on, y'all. And I want to know, how did this start? What was the idea behind the Startup Life that made you decide, all right, this is it, I'm going to go for it and create a podcast?
So it was actually my better half, my wife. So I was writing a blog, and she would edit it and stuff like that. She's like, you know what, you should probably just turn this into a podcast. And so, and to talk about prep time, like we was talking about in the last segment, I took about a month before I bought equipment or did anything or whatever. I took a month to just learn about podcasting, learn about how the industry is, who's doing it, how their style, their flow and stuff like that. And that was about October of 2016. And then we launched on November 2016 with the Startup Life. And so it was just an idea of trying to give entrepreneurs and career-minded professionals a way to kind of get a leg up on their competition. Eventually, in the beginning, I was just, I couldn't get guests. Matter of fact, in the very first episode, I make a joke that this is the first episode, we don't have any sponsors, so we're just gonna go into it. I just kind of poking fun at myself, but we did that show in order to just give people an idea of what it is to start a business, what it takes to start a business. We were on this journey, me and my wife, when we started our company a while back in 2013. And so we had kind of gained some insight and stuff like that. But I knew eventually, and we kind of talked about this earlier, about look, I'm not the supreme expert at this. So we started bringing on guests here in the Memphis area to kind of share, their stories and stuff like that. And then eventually just kind of grew from there. A lot of people from around the country were hearing the Startup Life, like, hey, can I have my client on this show? Can get this client on this show? And I was like, okay, so there might be other people who may want to come on the Startup Life. And so it just kind of grew from there. And then I had the crazy idea. It's like, you know what? I think I was scrolling on social media one day and I saw the co-founder of Netflix, and he had some content. I was like, I'm just going to shoot my shot. What's the worst thing? I'm going to ask him to come on the Startup Life. So I reached out to him and he was on board. He was like, yeah, let's do it. Not a problem. Not a game. Let's do it. His team and his representative, like, whoa, hold on, brother. Who are you? What your listeners looking like? This, that, and the other, right? And so I wasn't quite there with the listenership and stuff like that. So they was like, look, get your weight up, this, that, and the other. Call us back, let us know. So I was like, how can I get my weight up? How can I get more listeners and stuff like that? And then I was like, well, there's radio, I guess. I think radio are starting to bring on podcasters and stuff like that. So I reached out to about 400 radio stations around the country, and eventually 10 of them said, sure, let's do it. Right. And so that's kind of how that started. And so it was a radio station here in Memphis that's kind of changed over and done some different things now, but they gave me an opportunity and gave me a shot. And so I went back to the team for the co-founder of Netflix. And it was like, you know what, let's do it. And so episode 150 of the Startup Life features Mark Randolph, the co-founder of Netflix, which was a huge get. Like, everybody's like, you got that, dude? It's like, how did you do it? I was like, man, I went to the radio station, bought some time. I did buy the time at the radio station for full transparency, right? But that was me betting on myself. I was betting on the fact that like I can turn this into something, right? And that's your path if you're listening to this, and that's something you want to do. Go for it, right? But I guess it just leads to an ultimate point. Like, you gotta put some skin in the game if you want to like really make this a thing. If that's something that you really want to pursue, and that's with anything in life. But once we got the co-founder of Netflix on, it was, I don't know what happened at that point. Like, everybody wanted to come on the show. We've ended up the founder of Paychex, the founder of Dunkin' Donuts, a lady who teaches the United Nations how to negotiate. And it just kind of went crazy from there. And then we went to other radio stations, syndicated around the country, syndicated in the UK, almost syndicated in Australia, but then COVID kind of cut them out of the studio, so that kind of didn't happen, but that was going to happen. So 300 episodes plus later, and it's been amazing. It's crazy because I haven't created an episode for the Startup Life in a while now, because we've been on this new venture, and it's still doing crazy numbers, and that's one of the things, if you're thinking about podcasting, is to consider is evergreen content. Content that, like, if I ever created, there's people who still listen to the very first episode of the Startup Life because there's still good content there, or Mark Randolph's episode, when the whole deal with the Blockbuster documentary came out, that episode started doing numbers again because there's the story about Netflix and Blockbuster. But the point is that, like, when you make evergreen content, it never goes out of style. And so that's one of the beauties of the Startup Life. And that was just a crazy ride. It was just a crazy I never in my wildest dreams would I thought I'd be talking to the co-founder of a company like that. And then that brought on sponsorships and stuff like that. Some I had to pursue, some they came to me, a few partnerships and stuff like that. And I used some of that money to just buy new equipment, like this equipment you see here, stuff like that. So it's been really crazy. It's been really a really fun ride. And it's just amazing to just that's why I tell people when they say, how you doing, man? I'm living a dream. I'm living a dream. This is bananas. This is bananas. All from I started in my closet 5 years ago.
I love it. I love it. And these were weekly episodes, right?
They were weekly episodes, roughly about 45 minutes to an hour each week. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so much there that you just shared. I mean, even just thinking about how, starting with no guests, whereas I think folks now would really think about the Startup Life as being very interview style, right? That there is a guest. Right. Also with some of those first guests or first out of state guests being folks who really approached you.
Right.
And I think that speaks to the content.
Yeah, I think so. I would like to think so. One of the things is, again, how can you present, like, look, there's tons of entrepreneurial podcasts. There's tons of startup podcasts, right? But how can I bring it, a different, deliverable? How can I deliver it in a different way? So I was like, look, business doesn't have to be boring, right? You got the hip hop music at the beginning of the show. I'm talking to to billionaires like they're my buddies, like I've known them for years and stuff like that, in a respectful way, of course, right? But just delivering it in a different way. One of my guests, like, man, this is the best podcast music and entrepreneurship genre I've ever heard. You know what I mean? Because it gets you live, it gets you hyped. But we also talk about, tangible advice for entrepreneurs. And I think that's important. So again, it's all about how you want to deliver your content and have that differentiating value.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. That value is so key. But I mean, just to remind people, it wasn't until episode 150 where you got kind of this really big name guest on your show. So that's 149 episodes of consistency that really enabled that moment to happen.
Absolutely. And believing that this could be a thing, right? Like, and just constantly that constant belief that this would be a thing, throwing money for equipment from time to time. And that's another thing. Like, I waited until again, for a while before I started buying new equipment and things of that nature. But no, that consistency is so important. Again, I'm always reminded of like those memes on social media of the person digging in the tunnel and they just stop right before the gold and the diamonds and the jewels and stuff, right? Like that's kind of how it was. Like had I stopped at episode 148, wouldn't be talking to you right now, probably. I'd be one of those millions of podcasters and, that just kind of went by the wayside and are no longer with us. Like, matter of fact, there were some guys out of Florida. I love their show. It was called Educated Hustle, right? It was a startup podcast, stuff like that. And then they got the episode 100. They started before me and, they stopped or whatever. And then they started seeing what I was doing. It's like, dang, Dominic, we should have kept going. You should have kept, look at what you're doing, dude. Look at what you're doing. And I was like, man, I don't know what to tell you, man. I just, you can pick it back up. I mean, it ain't going nowhere, but again, it really is a journey, right? And on that journey, you're going to see people around you who are going to step on that journey with you. Some are going to sprint real fast, some are going to go slow real fast, but a lot of them are going to like, yeah, we out. This ain't panning out, this, that, and the other. But like anything, and the beauty of it, just to give it like some tangible stuff, the algorithm in Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Pandora, the more episodes you put out there, they will reward you because they're going to be like, oh, okay, you serious about this life. Let's bump you up higher in the search results, right? And so that's just something that's tangible to kind of give you, for those of you who are thinking about podcasting, a little bit of, incentive to kind of keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, again, to put it in context, as episode 150. So we're a couple of years in, but also making those investments in your own podcast, right? So not just the consistency with the content and showing up, but also making monetary investments in order to reach a broader audience. And so again, as we think about kind of continuing to hone your craft, it's not just the podcast itself, but also thinking about, okay, how can I reach more audiences? How can I, connect with more listeners? And so I think that's also key as well, to invest in yourself.
That investing in yourself, that networking with other podcasters, putting yourself out there to be, at podcast speaking engagements and things of that nature, but like it really is, it's not just the podcasting, right? Like it's that business side of it that you really have to be mindful of as well. If you want to turn it into a thing. Now, if you just want to do it as a hobby, do your thing, right? Do your thing. But if you're really trying to turn it into like be a professional podcast and really do something beyond just in your closet, then you got to put some skin in the game. It's just that simple.
Yes, put some skin in the game. And something you said at the beginning that stuck out to me was you really took the time on the front end to learn from others, right? To do some research, right? Back to the research and the prep, like thinking about podcasts that you like, thinking about interviewers that were, really good, and learning from them, learning their skill set, kind of teasing apart, okay, what makes some of my favorite podcasts, so good? What keeps me coming back? And really learning the craft.
Absolutely. And learning from people who are not particularly like, legacy podcaster, but just interviewers, right? And then watch some stuff about Oprah and how one of the greatest things that Oprah does, and I'm trying to master it, is that like, she will give a question that's like a few words and it's so impactful, right? That person will give an answer and she'll just give like a facial expression and they'll give you even more stuff. I was like, Oprah is a absolute master when it comes to interviewing, right?
Yes.
And listening to people like that, or Terry Gross on NPR, or even a Joe Rogan, or even a Breakfast Club. My point is that like, even though all of those people are in different types of genre, Larry King, like we mentioned earlier, even though they're all, in different kind of, genres or whatever the case may be, there's something to take from all of them. It really is. That's something Kobe Bryant did as a basketball player, stuff like that. That's something I try to do in podcasts, take that same mentality and like, let's see what Joe Rogan up to these days, right? Let's see if he switched the style up a little bit. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, speaking of other podcasts, do you have some favorite podcasts that you like to listen to?
Right now I'm all about history, right? So I love John Meacham's. John Meacham has a lot of podcasts. He has what is it called? I'm saying I love him now. I can't think of his podcast now. But it was said where he takes, and I'm just so in awe of the imagination. So basically, he took speeches of like Dr. King's speech, President John F. Kennedy's speech from when, his inauguration, Shirley Chisholm's speech from the Democratic National Convention, and like created like the story behind those speeches, what those words mean, dissecting the speech. And it's like, that's so creative to me. That's so awesome to me. So John Meacham is a good one. I also love there's so many good ones. And when I try to maybe a little less, not so history or whatever, I like Bob Saget has a good podcast as well. To kind of see America's Dad at one point, to kind of have say dirty words and stuff like that. It's hilarious to me. So no, there's a lot of good podcasts out there for sure.
Oh yeah, there are so many. And I know we mentioned earlier, there's so many different types of podcasts. I know a lot of folks are into true crime podcasts.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. Oh, everybody loves true crime. And I get it, right? You have shows like Dateline and stuff like that. So true crime, then you can do some, the sound design with the special effects and stuff like that. Yeah, a lot of people love the true crime genre.
Yes. And then there are some podcasts that, they are limited kind of run, like from the beginning, that it's only going to be 12 episodes or however many episodes.
Right. Yeah. Those are awesome as well. I was listening to one that was just so wild. I'm not even going to describe it on here. It was just so wild, but it was just amazing because you're only limited to your imagination, right? Some of the stories are true, some are fictional and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, they're just so amazing. They're so amazing. I just love the creativity in podcasts. It's just so amazing.
Yes, so much creativity. And like you said, only limited by your imagination. So hopefully for folks who are listening, who are on the fence about starting a podcast, just remember it's your imagination. It can take you as far as you would like to go. Let's take another break. You're listening to Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. We're here on Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM, or maybe you're listening online at WYXR.org. I'm SunAh, and I'm here with Dominic Lawson, and we're talking all about podcasting in honor of International Podcast Day on September 30th. Now, you have done something that I know a lot of people want to do, which is to move to full-time podcasting. And so tell me a little bit more about that part of your podcasting journey.
So, again, we had some very good success with the Startup Life podcast, and people started paying attention, and we didn't realize who was paying attention because we were approached by the Meadows Behavioral Healthcare. They say, hey, we heard your show. We would love for you to apply for this job. We are looking for a podcaster as well. Their podcaster, we were talking about NPR. He actually left for NPR. So now he's on NPR and kind of filling his role. But they listened to the Startup Life like, we want this. We want you. Would you be willing to think about it? And so they listened to the show. And I was like, I'll think about it. Talk to my wife about it. And I was like, first of all, before we even make a decision, Kenda, this is crazy. That's my wife's name, Kenda. Like, this is crazy, right? Like, this is absurd. Like, we're talking about podcasting here, right? And so I was telling, like, I don't know, I wasn't sure. And it's like, okay, I tell you what, come to Nashville or Franklin, just south of Nashville. Come to Franklin, let's talk. We're gonna put you up in a hotel and stuff like that. As well as like, oh, that's nice. And then I figured out what kind of hotel it was. And I was like, oh, this is real nice, right? And so that was just kind of crazy. And so we was in the hotel room. It was like, Kenda, like, we're in this room because of podcasting. Like, that's absurd. That is absurd. And so we talked to him, met with the team, stuff like that. He's like, you know what? Let's do it. And so now I'm the host, producer, and editor of the Beyond Theory podcast for Meadows Behavioral Healthcare. And if you're familiar with the Meadows, it's one of the leading organizations in the country when it comes to mental health and addiction recovery. And so on top of them throwing your boy a whole bag to do that show, but the work that we're doing, talking to mental health professionals, especially with everything going on right now, it's truly humbling and truly an honor as well. And so that's kind of how that started. Again, we're going back to what we were saying in the last segment. Had I stopped at episode 148, we wouldn't be here. There would be no Meadows opportunity. There will be no, saying like, hey, we really want you to do this show for us. And by the way, you're filling the shoes of the dude who left for NPR, right? Like, which is just bananas to me. It's like, this thing started in my closet, SunAh. Let's just sit. This thing started in my closet. And here we are, 5 years later. Is that, and again, that's why I say I'm living a dream. Like, this is absurd. This is absurd.
Yes,
but
yes.
It just goes to show that, like, if you believe in yourself, believe in the thing that you want to do, and willing to put some skin in the game, it's amazing and just mind-boggling how far it'll take you.
Yes, I love this. I mean, it has been amazing to watch your journey. And I mean, it just speaks to so many things, like you said, just the consistency, putting, skin in the game. But I mean, this is so you, right? Like, this opportunity, like, you so deserve it. You so deserve it. And, a couple years from now, maybe we'll be back here talking about this next big opportunity that you have, because that's, I mean, the trajectory is just crazy. So it's literally, who knows what may happen next, but it's really all because of your wife. Let's give it up for your wife.
That is true. I mean, let's call a spade here. That is true. So absolutely. Thank you, Kenda.
Yes. Now let's talk about Black is America, because this is not even going to launch for another, 5 months, February 2022, but already creating a buzz. And so I'm so excited. So we talked a little bit about it in the first segment. So this is going to be kind of more pre-planned, scripted, a lot more prep time, but kind of tell us, what was the motivation behind this particular podcast?
So when again, when you're a podcaster and you're just in that headspace, like, you have a lot of ideas for podcasts, right? I write them all down. That's one thing Shonda Rhimes said. Anytime you got an idea, write them down. So if Shonda say do it, that's what you do, right? So,
okay.
So in one of those, was a Black History podcast, right? And so a few years ago, my friend, he shared this article about Lieutenant John Fox. Lieutenant John Fox, World War II hero, called artillery shell fire on himself to kind of to kind of save, or to kind of recapture a city that was captured by the Germans. Eventually he was given a medal, but it wasn't the Medal of Honor. Then ultimately he got the Medal of Honor. And I was like, how come I've never heard that story before? Like, that dude is like a real American hero, right? And so to be able to call artillery strike on yourself, and what's about to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so it just made me think about, like, how, in America, the story of African Americans, well, a lot of times we hear it in history books. And let me be clear, like, these stories are very important. The civil rights movement, this, that, and the other. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that, like, we need to hear more stories about like a Lieutenant John Fox or Ann Lowe, who created Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress on her wedding day, right? Like, we need to hear more stories like that, so that way people who look like me can have those heroes, that look like them and stuff like that. So that was just super important for me. And so that's kind of how the Black is America podcast started, and so, but also in that same vein, I didn't want this show to be like this didactic, like, facts, figures, this happened in 18 such and such. Like, let's tell a story. Let's make it interesting, right? Let's get some sound effects in here. Let's get some sound design. Let's get some experts in here, to kind of tell the story. Because again, I'm not the expert. I'm just now finding out about these people, but there's been people who've been studying these people for years and years and years, and so that's kind of where that came from. And so one of the things I want to point out is that, like, the Black is America podcast, it's not about saying Black people are superior to anybody else. It's not about saying any of those things or whatever the case may be is not in response to critical race theory, but it's kind of in response to critical race theory. But but you gotta listen to the trailer to see what I'm talking about. But the point is that, like, look, the story of America, the way it is now, could not be written by people without people of color, without Black people. Like, and so that is just the way it is. And so that's why I wanted to call it Black is America. And that's why we're doing this show.
I am so excited about this show.
Mhm.
I'm excited because this is kind of a different type of podcast than what you have been creating. So I'm
Mhm.
excited to see you be able to unleash some of that other creativity that you have. So that's exciting to me. And of course, the content itself, so necessary. And because I know you, it's like, I know this is information I can trust. I know that this is like legit.
Right.
So I'm excited about that. And I'm even thinking ahead of like, this is something that I want to share with my students, because I'm always looking for, additional materials, things that are, interesting, entertaining, right? That they can kind of get attached to versus just kind of reading a textbook or, other things.
Exactly. And again, I'm not the expert. And so that's why we bring in the experts to help solidify the credibility of it. So for instance, for episode 1, we're going to have it'll be about Lieutenant John Fox, but we have a lady who wrote a book about, that story, Lieutenant John Fox's story. We have a senior historian from the National Underground Museum from Cincinnati, Ohio. We interviewed him already. We even have John Fox's daughter. We interviewed her, right? To kind of get her aspect and give some commentary and share her story as well. And so again, we see a lot of Black history podcasts and stuff like that. But again, how can you make it different? How can you that differentiating value? And so again, you got the storytelling, you have the facts and stuff like that. But it doesn't have to be boring. History doesn't have to be boring. It just doesn't. Right. And so we can bring it in a fun, unique way and also have some inspiring, aspect to it for young people who look like me. And I think that's important. And so I say, even though I haven't released the episode yet, it's the greatest thing I'll ever do.
Wow.
It is. It's this is one of those things where it's a legacy for me. Right. So it's a legacy for me. And like I said, we're switching up the style a little bit, with the narrative NPR style, but it's a lot of work, but it's a ton of fun.
Yes, I was thinking about, that conversation we had previously about prep time. And so I'm wondering, how much prep time is it taking you to create just one episode?
If I'm just talking about actual work time, days. It takes days, right? That's why, I announced it September 1st. That's why it won't release until February 22nd. Now, to be fair, I am a little bit ahead of schedule, right? But it takes a lot of work. Again, you got to secure the guests. You got to interview the guests. You got to do the research, right? Because one of the things I found out about history is that, like, you can have about 8 to 10 different sources talking about the same thing. And like those 8 to 10 different sources, that while they have the general aspect of it, it's not the exact same. It'll be like that one little detail. It's like, oh, okay, we got to add that in there. Like, oh, okay, that part. Okay. Because again, different vantage points, different insights, different experiences. And that's why I tell people all the time, even if you know something like the back of your hand, you should still do the research, because again, there's going to be those small nuggets, those small details, right? I'll give you a prime example. One of the things that I do for the Black is America podcast is, if I know of a certain date that I want to talk about, and seeing as that I'm sound designing, having special effects and stuff like that, or sound effects or whatever the case may be, I will go and research that date to see what the weather was like, so I can add that aspect in as well, to, like, if it's raining, have like rain or whatever the case may be. If it's sunny, or for the one for Bessie Coleman, she was doing an air show. So, the sky is clear. There's like, marching and stuff like that. So you add that sound effect in it. So to answer your question, it takes, while the startup life would take hours, that one episode takes days. Right. And it speaks to my growth as a podcaster, because these episodes will be into like 25 to 35 minutes long. But the quality is just going to hit different. It's just going to hit different. And that's important to me because this is an important project for me.
Yes. I mean, just those little details. I mean, that makes the difference, right? I'm listening to a historian talk about what's happening that day, and birds are chirping because it was a clear, crisp day, or leaves are rustling. That makes all the difference of setting the tone, but also making history come alive.
Exactly.
And that's so key. That sounds like a big part of this podcast, making history come alive, feel relevant and fresh for today.
It is, when we talk about history, again, a lot of times people get turned off from it because, it's just dates and facts and stuff like that. But if I can put you in the second floor tower of John Fox as he calls this, this artillery strike on himself, it just hits different. It makes you feel different. It makes you feel like, man, what was going through this dude's mind to make that decision? It's like you already know what's about to happen, right? Or if I can put you in the with Garrett A. Morgan when he goes down to kind of say the craziest thing. Garrett A. Morgan, he's known for creating the gas mask and stuff like that for, firefighters around the world they use and stuff like that. But there's a precipitating story of him like going to go save these people because they were building an underwater tunnel and they got stuck because a gas pocket exploded, right? Like I've never heard that story before. But if I can put you in that tunnel and put you into that thinking, that mindset, that's history on a different level. That's like you said, that's history coming live. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's where we're starting to accomplish. We have the first season is going to be 11 episodes. We have the opening of the first 8 episodes done. We have all 11 episodes written already. Now we just got to go back, get the interviews and stuff like that. So it's going to be 11 episodes, and the season finale of episode 1 will be Tom Lee from Tom Lee Park, right? How that came to be and stuff like that. So it's exciting, it's fun, but it's also important.
Yes. And these will be weekly. Will it be weekly?
These will be weekly. Yes.
Okay, awesome. I'm excited. I am so excited. And I can't wait to see what you do and where this podcast goes, like how it grows and how it evolves over time as well. And this idea of legacy. I mean, that's one amazing thing about podcasts. They are out there forever.
Right.
So folks can come back and listen to an episode 1 of the startup life, or have Black is America decades from now and still listen to it. Absolutely.
And again, I think that, as more and more people, you talked about 55% of people have listen to a podcast. There's still people out there who don't have that access, or they don't know how to access a podcast. And people, when I was talking about Black is American, it's like, how do I listen to it? Where do I go? What this and the other? It's like, it's on podcast. Where do I listen to a podcast? Right. So clearly, no matter what you're creating, there's still a lot of that mountain to uncrack, a little bit to kind of to get more listeners and stuff like that. And so, but yeah, it will be my legacy. Up until this point, it will be the greatest, podcast I will ever create because of its importance, what it means to me, what I'm trying to leave for young people who look like me to say, hey, look, we in this thing. And in every aspect of the American story, we were right there. We were right there. So that's important for me to get that message out.
Yes, so important. Well, Dominic, I know we're getting close to the end of our time together this morning, but I just wanted to leave you a couple minutes to kind of share with us, what are you most excited about when it comes to thinking about podcasting in the future? Of course, Black is America. I know you're really excited about that, but thinking about podcasting more broadly, what are you excited about for the growth of this industry, or where it may be going, or even something else?
I think, obviously there's the more and more access to podcasting that, allows people to listen to different stories and things of that nature. But I think the thing I'm excited about most are the new creators. That's what I'm excited about the most. Like these young people who are, 20 years younger than you and I and stuff like that. they got some, woo, they are so talented. They are so creative. Like when you see them with their TikToks and stuff like that, to see today's TikTokers kind of merge and grow into that mature aspect of of creating content in the podcast or whatever. Maybe they still do the TikToks or whatever, but that creativity is it's so good. It's so good. And so I think that's what I'm so excited about. I always say about Generation Z that like they're more talented than any generation before them. They just are. They're more creative. They're more smart. I don't care what anybody says. Like I believe that with everything in my being. And so to see them as they get older and mature and become more mature content creators and become podcasters is what I'm definitely the most excited about.
Yes. Well, Dominic, you have given us so many gems this morning. Thank you so much. I mean, this is definitely an episode that folks, even if you're listening live now, you'll have to go back, catch the replay because so many gems, so many gems. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you again to Dominic Lawson for joining us this morning. I learned so much. I know I will be listening to the replay on Apple, Spotify, wherever you stream podcasts, because look, especially for folks who are thinking about jumping into the podcast game, I mean, Dominic just gave you the whole blueprint today. So definitely go back and listen. Well, for today's positive note, I just want to reiterate something that Dominic said, which is that you are only limited by your imagination. And that doesn't just apply to podcasts, that can apply to any aspect of your life. You're only limited by your imagination. So it's time to let our imaginations run wild as we think about maybe what's next in our own lives. Y'all, this is Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. I can't wait to join you again next Monday morning.